So members, just one administrative announcement before we actually formally start. As some of you identified, your badges need to be updated. And so at the conclusion of the meeting, we will be escorted down to the security office. Unfortunately, we're going to take some photos.
Really? Use our younger
really? I will ask that they save these.
I protest.
I will ask they save these for the future. But we'll get those updated to ease your access. Everybody? Good morning. Welcome to the meeting of the Advisory Committee on Arlington National Cemetery. I'm Renee Yates. I have the honor of being the committee's designated federal officer. This is an open meeting, and present in person are Mr. Matt Davis, the alternate designated federal official, Lieutenant Colonel Papa Vasiliou, our OEC, Officer Army Cemetery G5, and Major Andrew Clark, our Arlington National Cemetery Operations Research Specialist. This open committee meeting is pursuant to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, codified 10 U.S.C. 7723. The committee operates under the authority and provisions of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, as codified in 10 U.S.C. 7723. The Federal Advisory Committee Act of 1972, Chapter 10, and 5 U.S.C., along with the Sunshine Act and Government of 1976. Arlington National Cemetery is the agency that receives the benefit of the committee's advice and recommendations. The designated federal officer is nominated by the executive director and is appointed by the administrative assistant to the Secretary of the Army. ANC provides all administrative support to the committee. Once again, this meeting is open to the public. However, members of the public are not allowed to present questions from the floor or speak to any issue under discussion by the committee without prior approval from the chairperson. Members of the public are eligible to file written statements or request to make verbal presentation in accordance with published Federal Register notice. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the public have been provided, members of the committee have been provided the statements we received. We also received several requests from the public to address the committee. We have time allotted for this in the agenda today. The Federal Register notice can be found on the ANC website at www.arlingtoncemetery.mil, about, and then the committee page. The proceedings will be available in written summary and made available to the public on the ANC website approximately 60 days following the conclusion of this meeting. It is my honor to introduce the co-chairman of the 2024 Advisory Committee and Lieutenant General retired, Mr. James Peake, and former Congressman, Mr. Chet Edwards. Please give your attention to the committee co-chairs.
We're going to call the meeting to order now and ask that you conduct the roll call, please.
For the record, the following members are in attendance. Secretary of the Army nominees, Mr. James Peake, Mr. Chet Edwards, Mr. Gene Castanetti, Ms. Ann Harrell, and Mr. Mark Farley. Secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission nominee, Mr. Gerald Torrance, and Secretary of the Veterans Administration nominee, Ms. Rosemary Williams. The following members are not in attendance, sir. Mr. Thomas Kelly. Mr. Chairman, based upon the committee members in attendance today, we do have a quorum. At this time, the floor is yours for Mr. Edwards for any opening comments.
Thank you. First, thank you all for being here again today. Appreciate it, and to those of the public that joined us, glad to have you here. It's always worth remembering one of the missions of our organization is to provide advice and counsel to the Secretary of the Army about Arlington. And the notion of maintaining the iconic nature of Arlington, make sure that we don't have lapses in that work because of the importance it plays and as a place of honor and dignity for our military and really for our nation. So the variety of topics that we have today are really informational, but you'll see we have a review of the objective status, that we were briefed on previously, and in keeping with that is sort of the notion of an oversight and being able to understand the progress. We've seen a lot lot of progress over the course of this committee, from the Millennium Project to the expansion, the southern expansion that's ongoing now, and I think we'll continue to have the opportunity to weigh in on these kinds of issues. So with that, Chet, let me turn it over.
It's good to see everyone and look forward to this session.
So, Mr. Chairman, committee members, please note that the approved minutes from our December 23 meeting and the report to the Secretary of the Army can be found at tab B in your binders. The agenda today includes several topics as requested by the committee during our last meeting. Additionally, we have set aside some time for a period of public comment. So I turn it over to you to our first briefing is on the Confederate memorial removal. I want to introduce Ms. Caitlin Smith, the Arlington National Cemetery Cultural Resource Manager.
Good morning. Thank you all for having me. As you know, I'll be briefing the Confederate memorial removal process this morning. As the committee is aware, we recently had a project to remove the Confederate memorial bronze elements in Arlington National Cemetery. The naming commission that was established by Congress recommended removal of the bronze elements of the monument, leaving the granite pedestal in place, and this became law in 2022. ANC was mandated to comply with this law by January 1, 2024, and we did. Removal occurred from December 17th to 22nd of 2023. A reminder that more information about the project can be found on our website, where we keep public up-to-date actions related to this project.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you. So, work on the Confederate memorial removal began on Sunday, December 17th. On that day, the contractor arrived on site and mobilized for work. They mobilized their heavy equipment, so the crane, the aerial man lift, telehandler forklift, the ground protection mat, crane materials were delivered to the cemetery. At this time, construction fencing was installed around section 16. A high-vis barrier, so this orange snow fencing that you're seeing here, was put around the sections of government markers to protect them. Also on this day, ANC's interment operations team removed the private markers. There were 4 directly around the base of the Confederate memorial, so these were removed as an extra precaution. So in these images, you'll see that here is the fencing around section 16, around the circle, high-vis fencing directly around the government markers. This meant that no equipment, no staff, no construction workers walked in the sections. There was only one path of entry provided to the memorial. And in the final image, you can see the marker, the private markers were removed and temporary markers put.
What were they for? What were the private markers for? Were they inscriptions of some sort? Or?
So there were 4 individuals buried around the memorial, okay, including the sculptor Moses Ezekiel.
Okay, so that just marked those graves?
Yes, marked those graves, yes.
It's a traditional method for when we're throughout the cemetery doing any kind of heavy equipment work in the vicinity of a marker, commemoration of a veteran. Take it out, remark it so that it's we don't lose the accountability of the location, but then also we don't damage. And 3 of them were government uprights, 1 was a private marker.
Okay. So when there was some discussion or concern that there were remains under the memorial, there are not.
They're adjacent
to.
So work really began the next day on Monday, December 18th. That was the day the contractor mobilized the rest of their team. It began with their carpentry team on site, beginning to build the crates for the bronze elements. On that day, work did begin on the top figural sculpture, the figure of the South. On that day, only 3 bolts were removed from the base as a test of their methods. So here you can see the team up in the aerial man lift. Again, in the aerial man lift, doing their investigations. These were the first 3 bolts removed successfully from the base of the sculpture. On that first day, or On the Monday, we did have high winds, so we had consistently winds of at least 20 miles per hour with gusts of 30 and 40, so work did stop at that point in time for the safety of the sculpture and the staff. On our third day, the carpenters continued their work. Here you can see some images of the custom crates that were built. The design of these was partially specified by our conservation team, myself, and in consultation with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. You can see these crates have ventilation to make sure we let any moisture that might get in escape, but they also have screening and mesh on the inside to make sure that no insects or pests could get into the crates. So here the crates are under construction. On this day also, portable light mast towers were brought to site. And the conservator and architectural historian did documentation, extensive documentation of the existing condition of the sculpture. Day 4 is when removal of the bronze really began. So on Wednesday, December 20th, the riggers began their work. They went up in the aerial man lift. They began again removing bolts, and they rigged the bronze elements for lifting. So here you can see them attaching these nylon straps to the top figure, and they did that before they began unbolting the sculpture to make sure it was secured and supported before they continued bolt removal. This is after bolt removal, obviously. What you can just see here is a tagline that was attached. So we've got the crane. You can see here, this is a tagline attached to make sure as the figure is transported from the monument down to the crates, it's under control at all times by a rigger on the ground. The 300-ton crane was parked on the roadway. It was never parked in the section. And it boomed out over the section, so we made sure that the heavy equipment didn't enter the section. The first piece, of course, to be removed was the Statue of the South, which was, every piece was given an ID number and an inventory that was labeled AC element 01. It was labeled, it was documented by the architectural historian. It was given a label and soapstone on the inside. It was also then given a brass tag through the bolt holes, so that there were multiple ways in which each piece was given an ID number. And that was also corresponded with the inventory sheet and with the crate in which the piece went.
So you give us which bolt came out of which hole at that point?
So the bolts were also bagged and tagged also, not to the level of this bolt went exactly in this hole. There were, I'd say, hundreds of bolts. And to that level, I don't think that was really necessary. But each major element absolutely got an ID number and was marked in multiple ways. Does that make sense?
And several of the bolts actually broke, so
Okay.
one-for-one reuse is probably not a realistic reconstruction. It would have to be, refabricated.
So on day 4, on Wednesday, again, as I already talked about, so the historians marked each bronze element with a number and ID tag. So here's a little more detail on that. Here's a close-up of one of the ID tags inserted through one of the bolt holes. So nothing permanent, no damage to the piece. This is an image of those bolts we were just referring to. So in this case, most of the bolts were bronze. We had bronze bolts, bronze nuts, and in some cases bronze washers. So again, everything documented, everything bagged, and everything put in the crates with the sculptural elements. This is a close-up inside the crate. There were many ways the crates were customized to secure the pieces. For our discussions with the state and with our conservators, the crates were lined with polyethylene to limit off-gassing and to provide an additional layer of protection between the bronze elements and the crates. We've got nylon straps, but the straps don't come into direct contact with the bronze surfaces. There is polyethylene foam between the strap and the bronze. So that's why you're seeing these sort of cool, noodly looking things. But this is actually a really good conservation material. It's stable. and provides padding. You can see these straps are then bolted attached to the framing. In addition, they did reuse, there are bolt holes on each of the pieces. We reused those holes, bolted through them to additionally secure the base of the pieces into the crates, so secured multiple ways. So now that the top figure was removed, we could reveal the internal structure. So again, we sent the architectural historian up to document the condition and the structure. So at this point, we could go up and we could see the steel supports that were inside the sculpture. We can see that they are highly corroded and not providing any support any longer. But all of this was documented at every step. The architectural historian went up and documented the conditions as we found them. So after the pieces were documented, then they began removal of the next element. That was next the pedestal of cinerary urns. This was labeled bronze element ANC02. Here you can see after the bolts were removed, it being picked up by the crane. Again, you can see the high-vis fencing around the government markers. There was only one lane of entry into and out of the section to minimize any traffic in any other part of the section and protect, of course, the graves. So here we see this piece being transported with the tagline by the rigger down from the statue to the roadway to be crated. The next element after that to be removed was bronze element ANC04. This consisted of several pieces, several small pieces, the wreath plinth, the biblical circle inscription, and the frieze of shields. And that's what you're seeing in the image on my far right. You can also see in this image, now we've exposed the top of the steel support structure. So that's what is poking out the top of this image. So the next element to be removed was the largest. This is the figural frieze. This was labeled ANC element ANC05. This element alone weighed 5,600 pounds. So here you can see before removal, additional documentation. Again, you can see the steel supports are rising out through it. After it's bolted, this is it being lifted up. You can see rigging using the existing bolt holes, so no additional damage or modifications to the pieces. We took advantage of the existing bolt holes that existed to attach the rigging, tagline. And this is after the piece has been removed and it's being transported towards the crane, towards the crates. So at this point, we had realized that the bronze sculpture had become a self-supporting, load-bearing bronze structure, so no longer the steel supports providing any support. In fact, we saw some deflection in the bronze pieces that had settled over time. So the next day, day 5, Thursday, December 21st, we are once again did additional documentation of the condition of the sculpture and the base. At this point, we've exposed most of the base. So again, the architectural historian documented all the conditions. You can also see in these images some of the original construction labels. So these were not applied by ourselves. These were from the original 1900s construction. You can see that they marked Roman numerals each side of the seams of the pieces. So if there's a 4 on this edge and a 4 on this edge, those two align. So these are original construction marks. Other things you can see in this image, so we can see the steel supports. You can see many of them have fallen. Here you can see the rigger with his impact driver loosening bolts. So each of the pieces had a flange, so a little lip through which there were bolt holes and bolts, washers, and nuts, which brought all the pieces together. And here you can see as we pull the pieces apart from the exterior, the bolts through the bolt holes. So on this day, 8 bronze pieces were removed, labeled ANC 06 to ANC 13. These pieces were 300, 800, and 1,000 pounds. So here we've got one of those 800-pound pieces. This is the first piece to be removed. You can see in more detail how we've utilized the existing bolt holes to attach the rigging. Again, you can see the Roman numeral markings on the interior. I think this is a better image showing you the setup with the crane. So again, the crane in the roadway, the protective high-vis fencing, the crates are also in the roadway, and so we're lifting to the crane and then over to the crate. And here you can see the piece going into the crate. So this is after the first piece is removed on the base. You can see extra protection of the granite as they go. This is one of the 1,000-pound pieces being detached. You can just see the bolt holes and the rigging through the bolt holes. And then this is the final piece that was left in place. The last inscription piece on the southern side, right before removal. So in addition to documenting the bronze very thoroughly, we had made a commitment to document any other structural elements we found. So as we went, we did document the steel structure. Again, highly corroded, so not something that could be reused. It was no longer providing any support, and much of it had fallen and failed. But we did document every piece. So here you can see them sort of in plan from overhead. Each of these received its own number. Each of these was documented, inventoried, and crated. And here you can see them in the crate with these bronze torches. Each of these were about 300 pounds. And you can see we've separated inside the crate to make sure the steel is separated from the bronze, and there's additional poly barriers. You can also see in these images some of the other materials. There's thick polyethylene foam on the floor of each of the crates for extra padding. You can see the interior of the vents with the screening, some of the other crate details. So at the end of day 5, Thursday, all crates were loaded into the flatbed trailers. Here you can see this photo was taken from inside the aerial man lift. This is again a good overview of what the site protection looked like. So we've got the government markers sectioned off with the high-vis fencing, so you can see no one entered those areas. This was the one pathway from the sculpture to the crane, over which the pieces were transported. You can see the crates in the roadway surrounding. You can see ones that have been finished with their lids put on the crates and tarps on top. You can see all equipment, all the trucks parked in the roadway. And here you can see the crates being loaded using that telehandler forklift onto the flatbeds. And in the final image, you can see that the crates are each, of course, strapped to the flatbeds. So all the crates were loaded and staged for delivery the next day. So very early on Friday, December 22nd, the crates were transported to the federally owned storage facility. Once they were at the storage facility, the crates were opened, and our USACE contract team did inspect the sculptural elements and all the crates to make sure everything was delivered in sound and safe condition.
Just on the, I presume as engineers, what do they have? I mean, the abbreviation.
Yes, so the Army Corps of Engineers would be our contracting team for this effort. Absolutely. So the crates are safely delivered. We have, of course, the inventory sheets and the documentation for that. Back here at the cemetery, all of the contractor equipment was removed from site on that final day on Friday. So here you can see once the equipment is all gone, all the fencing is gone, all the contractors' equipment is gone. At this point, the ANC staff re-enter the picture. At this point, we inspected the granite base, the conditions, we cleaned it, we secured it, and there'll be more in my next slide about this. But this is what the base looked like by the end of Friday, with protective fencing and screening and a tarp over the base. And what I'm going to talk about on the next slide, when we did our inspection of the base, what we found and the care we took with that. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the next steps for this project, and a lot of that has to do with the granite base. So as part of the Section 106 process for this project, so part of the National Historic Preservation Act compliance, a programmatic agreement was come to with the Virginia State Historic Preservation Office, the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. And that programmatic agreement really guides ANC in our compliance for this action. So in compliance with that agreement, ANC was committed to documenting the condition of the base and providing recommendations for short and long-term preservation. So throughout this whole process, I was constantly in contact with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. I gave them frequent updates from the field and notified them of what we found. So what we found after the sculpture was removed was the granite block base was infilled in the center with a rough concrete, so it's not a solid granite base. And on top of that rough filled concrete were all those steel supports. And in the removal process, we did have to cut the base of several of those steel supports. So now what you have are at least 3 corroded, rusted steel nubs, the remains of those steel supports embedded in the concrete base. We also found a lot of construction debris, so a lot of corrosion products, some wood shims and other construction materials. So the base was filled with debris. So the ANC staff undertook a number of immediate preservation actions. So of course a lot of photo documentation and note taking. We then I, as the Cultural Resources Manager with our Conservation Program Manager, sifted through all the debris just to ensure that there was no unanticipated finds. And mostly, again, what we found were construction shims, some additional bronze bolts, things of that nature. So we sifted through all that. We collected anything of note, notified the state of what we found. But there was nothing really significant, and we did not encounter the memorabilia box. We then, once it was cleared of debris, we cleaned it, we photo documented it, so scale, color card, and then we determined that due to the safety hazards with the exposed rusted elements, that we should secure the site. So we did put fencing immediately around the base with green screening and tarped over the base to make sure it was watertight protected while we looked at what the long-term solution should be.
Did you expect to find a memory box of some sort? Was there a feeling that there was something there?
So we knew from newspaper accounts and all our historic research into this bronze sculpture that yes, when the cornerstone was laid, the newspaper said a memorabilia box was put under the cornerstone. We didn't really expect to discover it because if it's under the cornerstone, it should be beneath the ground. But that was one of the precautions we knew we wanted to take. It came up in public meetings and it came up with the state of Virginia. So we have in our programmatic agreement an entire protocol on what we would do if we did encounter it. So we knew it was there. I did not expect to find it because I believe it's below the ground, but we had a process in place in case we did.
Okay.
So that was our short-term actions. So now we've presented to the state and the UCHP what our long-term solution is, or our longer-term solution is. So at this point, we will be creating a weather-resistant smooth surface at the top of the base to make sure it sheds water and prevent water intrusion into the structure. And it will provide a stable walking surface in case visitors or staff attempt to climb on the base. So we'll do this by further cleaning the base, documenting the conditions. We'll cut down that rough concrete a few inches to make a flat, even surface to pour a new layer of concrete. And we'll make that a smooth, slightly domed surface of concrete to make sure it sheds water. But because we're preservationists, we will also not take that concrete to the edge of the granite. We'll put a bead of sealant so that there's a barrier between the concrete and the granite. And then once that's cured, we'll remove the fencing and restore the site and reopen it. And at this time, that's all I have in my presentation.
Did you have any press? Any press?
So we did not have anybody, request to come up, and we did have some visits from some Army senior leaders. Who came on. The public could actually see through. We had the fencing we had around the, you saw was clear, so the public could watch from a safe, behind everything inside that tall fencing, gray fencing, was PPE required. Because
No TV cameras or?
Nope. That, we don't allow that on NC anyway. All that has to happen on Memorial Ave. So again, there were some articles written. They did bring up, we had an immediate day at the end where they came up, took pictures, and then they left. But no video camera.
Do we get to know where it went, or is that better left unsaid?
It's in a federal facility in Richmond. We can say that it's in the state of Virginia.
May I ask about the integrity, excuse me, of the artifacts? You talked about the steel beams, and I know something about corrosion, but what was the general condition of the statue, given its age?
I'd say the general condition of the statue is good. I worked on a lot of bronzes, and they're pretty resilient materials. I would say, again, as we noted, there was some deflection, so the pieces have spread a bit, so they're not as they would have been in the early 1900s. But it was supporting its own weight, and it was a lot of weight. The details are still good. Most of the corrosion we found on the bronze was on the interior between connections where water sat. But all in all, it's
From your perspective, did you guys learn anything about the statue you didn't know when you did so?
Oh, absolutely. The statue has been talked about a lot, but there's not a lot of documentation from when it was constructed. So we were guessing on some things. I had done a preservation treatment on this statue maybe 10 years ago. And so we were aware of where sort of the seams were between pieces. But we found one newspaper account that said X amount of crates were shipped from Germany to the US, but we actually didn't know how many, we couldn't be 100% sure how many individual pieces there were. We had a good idea between looking at the exterior seams and that one newspaper account, and we could sort of look through some of the gaps, but most of what we knew we had to extrapolate from our experience and our knowledge of the technology and how these things were done at the time. So we thought there was a support structure, but we weren't sure exactly where, and we weren't sure exactly what it consisted of. So yeah, we learned a lot about how they made something this large, a sculpture of this type, in the early 1900s. So I think there's lots of good information, which is why we document that.
Right now, all we have is the marble base, correct?
The granite base, yes, with that concrete.
And that will stay there until somebody makes a decision what to utilize in that space?
Yes, so part of our consultations with the public and with the state of Virginia and with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which resulted in that programmatic agreement, lays out our process for the rest of this. And for now, it has our agreement for what we immediately do with the base, which is what I've outlined here. But it sets forth a consultation process for further discussions on interpretation and what might happen to the rest of the site and the base. So it leaves that open.
Do you have a general timeline when you might come to a conclusion for the next very broad timeline? Best guess.
Again, the programmatic agreement does have timelines for various pieces of the process. So it had timelines for when we should take certain actions regarding the base, and it has timelines for pieces of the consultation process, yes.
And we can assume years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is,
some of them.
yes, and I want to say, I know I wrote it, but I think it's
One
a
of them is
5-year
5 years,
agreement.
yeah, for interpretation, I think.
It's a 5-year agreement. And then if for some reason we haven't reached resolution, there are processes for amending or extending the agreement.
Has the governor of Virginia come back at all? At one point I read in the paper that he was interested in having part of it displayed somewhere.
That's all part of what will be some of the next steps, is part of that process, and he's not written, other than a first letter that he wrote to the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Army, he's not received another one.
For clarification, on the pathway that you showed on slide 17, there were no graves, that was an existing place, just to.
Yes, the section has a sort of a cross pattern, 4 pathways in,
Just one of
and we just used one of them. So,
Clear on that. Yeah,
absolutely,
that
yeah.
area there.
Yeah, so there are
Wasn't graves
no
destroyed
graves.
or anything like that.
No, it's always been a pathway.
There's 4 quadrants essentially of graves within inside that section. And Caitlin didn't say it, but in the picture, but all the headstones, the 3 government markers and the 1 private marker were replaced that cleanup day, the last day.
And we talked about that it's being stored in a federal facility, but under whose control is that now? Is that the Army historians or engineers?
So it's a Department of Defense facility, but the Army still owns the monument.
But it's not an Arlington Cemetery, it's
Correct. The Army will work through Arlington National Cemetery for the consultation process, but the Secretary of the Army is the one that will make all the decisions moving forward.
But let me ask, Secretary of the Army makes all decisions relating to Arlington Cemetery, so that doesn't necessarily indicate Arlington Cemetery is completely out of this process. The programmatic agreement is between 3 entities. One of those 3 entities is Arlington Cemetery. So
That's correct.
technically Arlington Cemetery is still involved in this process moving forward. Is that correct?
Correct.
So based on that, could you give us just a very brief, maybe a minute or 2, summary of, how this process will move forward? And I would like to ask on behalf of the committee a more detailed written description of the process moving forward. Because I think there are going to be people who will want to know what that process is moving forward. And given that this process to make this decision, in my opinion, wasn't very transparent in many ways, I think the process moving forward should be far more transparent. But could you give us just orally, just a very brief summary of, some 3 entities sitting down at the table having a discussion? You think it's a 5-year process, and just kind of some high points.
So there's and I'll let Caitlin, who's the SME on this talk, but so the programmatic agreement has several stipulations, and I believe the programmatic agreement's on our website.
Yes.
Yeah,
It is on the website.
It's on the website,
Okay,
you can see it.
that's great, thank you.
So it's got several stipulations, and it maps out, because there are several activities where you have to move forward. Eventual disposition is 1. Mitigation for the site, 2, and then long-term interpretation. I think those are the 3 major
main pillars. Yeah.
main pillars of what we have to still do. And they each have different levels and elements of discussion and negotiation. One of the first steps for disposition is we have to develop, how we're going to do the protocols. And so the 3 entities, the entitled parties, will meet and discuss that, and each have an equal part in discussing how that will occur. So that's kind of the short term of that. So we don't have any other information we can provide you right now, because that's not been, it's been
Right.
60 days since it's been down. So that will continue to move forward. At the same time, our biggest, I think, Caitlin, I won't take the word for you, but right now our largest effort is making sure that the in situ, the items that in place that will remain in Arlington are preserved in the proper way and taken care of. So that's where our efforts are right now. That's our primary effort right now. And because the statue is secure, it's stored safely, it's no rush to failure on its disposition. And then the third element, interpretation, is the longer, because there's a lot of engagement required there's a lot of things to consider, and I'll let you talk maybe a little bit about that process and all. Caitlin, about the stipulation.
Sure, that will look more like the public process that we've had at the beginning. So that's more, there are a number of ways we'll talk with the other tenant parties about how to go about it, but it's probably public meetings, it's probably another open comment period where people can write into us, input, and that's probably, usually interpretation is more of a discussion, and we'll probably go through many iterations of what it looks like, what style it is, what's the actual content, and that will be a long discussion with the community and with the public, those parties of interest.
It has a direct bearing on what Arlington looks like.
That's correct.
So I think,
Right.
I would suggest that we be routinely updated on where we are on that, so that we can have an opportunity on it as opposed to.
And of course, the other party involved will be, Commission of Fine Arts, et cetera. And there is one other piece to this, and that's there's an additional documentation requirement. So we are also contracting with the Historic American Building Survey, since they are the ultimate documenters of historic objects, to provide an up-to-date history, documentation of the sculpture. They'll do some additional digging into the archives, and provide an official report that goes to the Library of Congress for the sculpture.
The documentation is one thing. The other, the more particular to this committee, is the impact on Arlington itself as opposed to, how we made a comment to the Secretary of the Army in a previous report about our confidence in the Army, our historians, and the ability to do this interpretation. So I think it would really be of particular interest to us more acutely about what's going on now with the site and how the interpretation will be done.
We spent a fair amount of time in the committee drafting the statement to the Secretary about our concerns about the process. Was there any return on that?
The action is still with the Secretary.
Two things. Let me commend whoever made the decision to put the process on the website. I thought that's a good decision. And just to clarify, in your professional judgment, the memorial could be for final disposition. We may not know for years, but it could technically be reassembled. Based on what you've seen, the way it was disassembled, the decision was to reassemble it somewhere. It could be done.
I think, yes, it is possible that the sculpture could be put back together. I think the pieces are in good condition. We did no damage to them. We have all the components. I think if it were reconstructed in its original configuration, someone would have to consider whether it needs a new internal support structure.
Right.
And what kind of base it would require to support all that load.
Okay, thank you.
And then if the political environment was to change and the naming commission was to change politically, then it could be reinstated here in Arlington. Is there any law that would prohibit that?
Currently, the law is it was to be removed. So something would have to be changed to direct its placement back in Arlington. Department of Defense has removed it, and
But if there was a change in administration in Congress or something?
so we can't predict, but anything could happen.
But that could happen.
It is able to be reassembled
Physically, it can be reassembled
wherever we're told.
But it would take, following up on what Gina asked, it would take congressional action, not executive presidential action.
Correct.
The law,
At this
because of
point,
those laws, statute driven.
That was gonna be my point. I think I read in some of the comments that there are several comments on it already. I believe I saw that in those last several documents that were sent out. So, and how we can follow it, that would be, so ANC would still be one of the claimants if something were to change in the future. It could be. And I think that should be our point, that if it was constructed here and something does change in the future, then we still want to be a claimant because of the impact it has at our instead of 16. Is that a fair statement?
when you say claimant, what?
Well, there are people that are saying that they want the monument and they will, and I think Arlington should remain a claimant to that and say, wait a minute, it was constructed here. If something changes, reassembled and constructed somewhere, I think Arlington should remain one of the ones. You know, and it's the wrong term, but
I think it's
right
right
at
for
first
confusion. I think in our recommendation that should things change, we believe that this is a good place for it to be jurisdiction. I think we can cover that. Yeah, that was our initial. I think the important thing is physically it can be reconstructed. I mean, it's a tremendous briefing, for sure.
Take you to the details, get back to it.
Yeah. So,
And the speed.
yeah. Good work, by the way. Other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we're going to open the floor for approximately 30 minutes to the members of the public who requested to present information to the committee in accordance with public federal register notice. We will allow those who have not provided or who didn't previously let us know. If there's anybody else, we'll take those at the end. Before we begin, I will ask the public to respect each other's time and the manner of presentation, noting that any time if the discussion is disruptive, inappropriate, or beyond the time limit, the speaker will need to be asked to stop. We ask that each member of the public, when you're called upon by name, please come up to the front. Ask you to introduce yourself clearly so we can capture you for the minutes. And we will provide you 3 minutes. We will give you a little bit of a warning at the 30-second mark so you know when that's coming up. And I apologize in advance for any mispronunciation of any names. So if we could begin with Ms. Linnell Siegel. Wherever you feel comfortable. Then don't feel it. You can go to the podium or you can stand wherever you feel comfortable.
Hi, everybody. Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, members. I'm Linnell Siegel, and I represent the Society for the Preservation of Jewish Civil War History. And I have to tell you, I'm a little emotional after watching the photographs of the removal of the Reconciliation Memorial. It sort of brought back my experience being there on Sunday and Monday witnessing the destruction. But I want to thank each of you who are on the committee for your service and your immense concern of the Fabergé edge of this Arlington, and for your efforts on this difficult subject. I'm sorry it had to happen on your watch. But I did witness it and on Sunday and Monday, and I've been in contact with the family before for this, but I honestly have not had the courage to give them a report of what I saw. And I have pictures, I'm happy to share them with you. But that aisle leading to the stone of Moses Ezekiel's grave, that's the staging area for where the man lived, ran back and forth and loaded the pieces of his memorial. My mother taught me that graves are sacrosanct. If she was alive today and she first brought me here to this memorial, which I've been coming to for years, she would probably have gotten arrested that day. That aside, I am concerned about the water intrusion. I do hope the preservationist is giving the proper care to that. And I would like to have 2 thoughts to leave with you. First of all, it would be really nice if you could go back to having hybrid meetings so that people like me, dark my expense account, could show up sometimes. And also, Lieutenant Colonel Torrance, first when this came up, expressed concern about the unintended consequences. And I just have to think every day about, do we have more or less anti-Semitism in America after the decision to remove this memorial was made? I do hope you will use your influence to set this right.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask you a question? Thank you for your courage in speaking to us. If someone cares about this deeply, Do you feel like you have access to understanding what the process is from here forward? Were you aware? I was not aware that the process is on the website.
No, we've been watching the website, and actually I asked about the letter that you all worked so hard to craft. I was the one who asked about the status of that at the last meeting, and I do know it's now up there, but I do watch the website a lot. It's a very confusing process for the layman to keep up with.
Thank you.
I would make a note that rather than destruction, what we're doing is really attempted preservation. Your point taken that it was removable, but you know what I was pleased to know is that this thing is preserved some way and really in a remarkable fashion.
And I do hope that you all will use your massive influence to make things right.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
Next is Laura.
Speaking, but I'm very happy to have everything to say. My name is Laura Rogers, and thank you for giving me an opportunity. I am the daughter of a veteran, and I have 5 family members created a bloodshed of this memorial. And so it's very personal to me, and it's very sad and very tragic. I also feel very emotional right now, having witnessed this. I went to the cemetery to pay my respects to my parents on the anniversary of my mom's death. And when I arrived, I saw the fence, and I had not tracked the memorial desecration like some people have, but I knew that it was out there, and I'd written letters to the cemetery and attended public forums. And what I witnessed was so disturbing to me. It was missing from the photographs, even though it was a fine presentation. It was missing from the still photographs was what actually happened. And that was a cherry picker sitting on top of Ezekiel's grave for 4 days, and wood planks to protect the grass in front of his grave, and a coffee club set up, a coffee mug sitting on the front, and things like that. And it felt very disrespectful. Well, my family goes back to the American Revolution. We have DNA, we have service in our DNA. And it was very, very disturbing to me. I was on my Christmas vacation. I intended to be at the cemetery for 20 minutes, and I stayed for 2 days because I couldn't leave her. I couldn't leave that site. It was so disturbing to me. So to me and to my family, that site represented hope, and it represented how a country could come together after a very difficult time. And that was something to be optimistic about. That was something of beauty. And instead, it was just completely desecrated and paid such disrespect to veterans and their families. From my perspective, it was nothing but disrespect, an erasure of history, an erasure of beauty, and nothing good came of it. Absolutely nothing good came of it. It didn't change hearts and minds. It didn't erase racist ideologies. Nothing good came of it. So thank you for letting me share my thoughts today.
Thank you for sharing.
Julie Hardaway.
I didn't know I was speaking. But I'm Julie Hardaway. I'm the Vice President General of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Very proud of my lineage also. My ancestors came into Jamestown in 1619. I would like to say that I think that I can really narrow this whole thing down, because while I was sitting there today, you gave a demonstration of the monument was deconstructed, which my organization paid for. And then the next fellow talked about how we were telling stories, telling these people's stories. And it just really resonated with me on August 23rd when I was on that Zoom call with y'all. You know, as a consulting party, that there was a young man on that call, and he was a veteran. I hope y'all remember this. He said that he was out here walking through the cemetery and didn't even know that that monument existed.
that he was really having a low point, really in a valley in his life. I think he said he was going through a divorce. And he said he went by that monument and it just struck him and really spoke to him. And guess what? Now, he can't. Gone. You know, those are the kind of people that we need to be supporting and helping through the hard times in their lives. And that monument spoke to him. It was a monument about reconciliation and peace. And you've lost that story. Those Confederates in that circle, where's their story? You know, that quote by Calvin Coolidge up here has just really gotten to me since I'm sitting here. You know, the state of Virginia, Commonwealth Virginia, called up these men to fight in 1861. And here they are turning their backs on them. Those men, you know, it wasn't that they supported their government or whatever. They did their duty. They were called to defend their state, and they did what they were called to do. And here we are spitting on them, just like Vietnam veterans were spit on when they came home. It's the same thing. Those men were not thanked. It's taken our nation 50 years to realize how we mistreated Vietnam veterans. And here we are, over 160 years later, spitting on Confederates. It's wrong. And I want to thank you. You were on the renaming call. I got on that, on the renaming of Jackson Circle. I want to thank you because you stood up and you said, I think that it needs to be left the same name. And you also said that we are kowtowing to a woke agenda, and that's exactly what we're doing, and it's wrong. It's wrong. I'm the daughter of a World War II veteran. I'm a daughter-in-law of a Korea and a Vietnam veteran, and I'm thankful that he's not buried here. He's buried at Quantico. Thank you.
Ms. Hardaway, can I ask you, same question, do you feel with your interest in this, in your organization's interest in it, do you feel you understand the process going forward and whether you and your organization will have any input into that process?
I don't really understand that. I think our President General can speak better to that. She's higher than me. But, you know, I feel that, you know, the damage is already done. And I'm not real sure that the monument can be put back together. You know,
They tell us it can't.
The
It
way it
looks
was
as if they
taken
went to
apart.
great trouble to see that that is an option going forward.
So,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for hearing me.
So since a couple people didn't let us know they wanted to speak or raise their hand, is there anyone else who would like to speak? Go right ahead, and if you could say your name when you come up so we can make sure we get it.
My name is Jenny Legasky. I'm President General of the Daughters of the United Mothers of the Confederacy. We are a long-standing patriotic women's organization. We were formed in 1894. In 1914, when the Daughters of the Confederacy presented the Reconciliation Memorial to President Woodrow Wilson with the donor intent to bring unification to a broken America. Through the public viewing of this beautiful piece of history and artwork, the federal government, acting as the caregiver of the setting for this monument, has not held up the donor intent of this monument. The donors have concerns that it has been removed from the public view and the message of unity has been endangered. The Reconciliation Memorial had a story to tell, and it was of that time period. And unfortunately, the story of unity and their lives is not being heard today. As the donors of this memorial, we hold the history of this piece of valuable artwork. Please allow us to have a true voice in this process, because up to today, we have not. And we do hold the history to this monument. And then you had asked Julie, no.
You don't feel comfortable that you have an understanding of the process moving forward?
I hear that the next step is the strategies, but to be honest with you, I have sat through, as a consulting party,
on every one of the meetings. And I'm just gonna be blunt, it was like a dog and pony show. Our voices, they weren't heard. Because on the very first call, there were 279, I think, people signed up to speak. There were only 2 people who spoke negatively about this monument. The rest spoke in favor of, this is to bring peace. This was to bring healing to our nation. It's in a perfect setting at Arlington. You couldn't get a better setting for this monument, for the memorial. We had ideas, but nobody wanted to hear our ideas. We had 1 minute to talk, and you knew what you said was going on deaf ears. So we have not truly had a voice in this process. And I hope the next steps will not be the same. As the donors of this memorial, it was with our hearts. Ladies gave money that they did not have, and it was on the behalf of President McKinley, who asked in 1907 for the daughters to take over this project so that it would be done, so that our country will come together to heal. I don't see any healing today. I see more division than ever before, and that breaks my heart.
Renee, let me ask you, for those who care deeply about this process moving forward, and they're not sure how the process is going to work, do you think the information that you referenced earlier on our website will answer their questions? Or is there some place they should call or contact to try to better understand? Will there be public hearings? Will there be a chance to have the voices heard?
That's what's being formulated now. If they read the programmatic agreement that we made with SHPO, State SHPO, and the ACHP, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, it lays out that the work now is to put the plan together and the protocols for the next steps. So your question is a little premature in the sense of, we don't even know what the next exact steps are.
Okay.
So we can't say it's gonna be a meeting now and this is what we're gonna do. So that's all being.
So it's not there's been a plan put in place and it's been kept secret from those who
No, there's no,
want to be
right now,
involved.
right now we are focused on ensuring that the plan that remains in place is cared for. That's our highest priority, developing the protocols and plan for the longer decision about disposition, which could take years. And then, the third one is the interpretation. And it'll all follow what is called the Section 106 of our Historic Preservation Laws, National Historic Preservation Act. You look that act up and it lays out the processes. It's not an AAC process, it's not an Army process, it's not a DOD process. We implement that law. So that's what the way ahead is.
We're just an advisory committee, but to the extent that the Army is one of the 3 main partners in this process, I hope the Army will encourage this process to be more open than the renaming commission was, so that Americans can have input before our actions.
Goes on to the second point of disposition. I think would be, given the interest in the disposition, it'd be worth as we get information available about the steps that we understand A, where we are as Arlington, and B, what who the other players are, and what the opportunity is for those players and their organization to weigh in.
One of our concerns is that it's going to go on another piece of government property, depending on who's in charge in DC. We're going to have to keep going through this every time there's a change in command. And that monument cannot go through being torn down, put back up, torn down, put back up. And that is our fear, that that's what could end up happening. It was in a safe place. And I
I'm just very, very concerned because we do want our voices heard. There's a lot of people who express that.
Ms. Martin, in your organization, is there any documentation of the original donation?
Yes, we have all that information. We have the dollars.
Yeah,
I have at our headquarters, we have the ledger of every person who donated. We have the original pieces of work. We have letters. We have the contracts. We have every step that we followed.
Was there any clause in that original donation that said it belonged to you?
Unfortunately,
You understand what I'm saying?
yes. Unfortunately, at the time, the President General and the daughters felt like the government was in good hands. So when they presented it to Woodrow Wilson, they presented it to him with the donor intent that this would stand. And it was almost there for, a long time until now.
Thank you.
Could I, Renee, do you mind if I make a comment to the ladies that have been here so far?
It would be the chairman's,
I think most of you were on most of the calls that we had, so you could get the gist of what was happening. And so I think most of you understand that the naming commission was put into law by 2021. And what we call the National Defense Authority Act, so that's where our funding comes from. That's who funded the commission. And I think also you all followed the gist of it, that the naming commission came, they didn't engage with Arlington. They came, they did what they thought was their duty, and they left. I think you can understand, I think all of us can understand through your comments and through some of the comments that we had between ourselves, that this was a gift from the daughters of the American Confederacy, and it was in good faith to the federal government. We did, as I think most of you also know, we did send a relatively direct missive to the Secretary saying we didn't feel like we were part of the situation, part of the discussion, but that we had heard a great deal from the American public, and that by far the majority of the comments were in favor of leaving the monument in place. And as Renee has said, the Secretary still has that communication. I want you to know that we did. Now, what we can do, under the auspices of the co-chairs, we made our findings obvious to the Secretary of the Army. I think what's useful now is that we make it transparent on where we're going to go from here. We can beat our heads against the table about why did this happen, why did the country let this happen. It's kind of, that's not going to be real useful. But I think based on what information you have, I think that will be very helpful. I hope they'll be very helpful in the disposition of the monument going forward. And you're right, if it should be reconstructed, it should be done with the understanding that you can't change your mind every 100 years. But I hope you know that we did listen to you, and we did have a concern, and I will tell you unofficially, I think we were very sympathetic to your view. That our job is to advise, and that's pretty much what we did. So I thank you, and I think all of us thank you for coming in. It's a very emotional topic. Everyone on this committee has an opinion. And I think it's good to hear from you all. We really don't want you to think that nobody listened to you. Should you have been more involved? Probably. Should public opinion have been more involved? Probably. That was the way the Naming Commission conducted its business.
And I appreciate that, because I really did. I felt like it fell on deaf ears.
It did not fall on deaf ears.
And I thank you for telling me that, because I did ask that question, where's our comments going, who's listening, who's seeing them, and I could not get a response. So I do appreciate you clarifying that.
We worked very hard to send a missive to the Secretary that was very fair, based on what the law has been. And I think Mr. Edwards could address this way more better than I can. But, Washington is a difficult place to do business. know, and democracy is a terrible government, except for the fact that it's better than everything else. So this was a rascally rabbit.
It was. And I would add to what Ann is saying, you still are constituents of members of Congress. As Ann just pointed out, there was a congressional action that started this process. Having served in Congress for 20 years, I can tell you out of 535 members of Congress, I bet there weren't 3 that knew that the result of the bill that they voted for, which is a lengthy bill, funding the Department of Defense, I think it said, weren't 3 that knew that the end result would be the Confederate memorial would be taken down. So you have every right as a citizen to reach out, not to just an advisory committee, but to the members of Congress that wrote the law that led to this. And ultimately, what they do, I can't say, I'm not there anymore, but we do have a voice there. You have a right to have your voice heard.
Many daughters wrote to their congressman and said, please put a stop to this. So I know in our own districts and our own states, they heard from us.
Well, that National Defense Authorization Act comes up once a year. So you have future
We're going to be on
opportunities.
it. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
That's me. She covered everything we're doing.
Okay.
Okay, so
Phil,
if I'm the first.
and I'll be.
All right. All right, well, thank you all for allowing me a few minutes to speak today. My name is Philip Andrew Hamilton. I'm a resident of Charlottesville, Virginia, former candidate for the Virginia House of Delegates in the 57th District. Last year, I actually ran for state senate against Craig Deeds. I've been acting as a defender of history in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'm a member of the Virginia Council, proud to have a vice chair of the Virginia Council present here as well. And, you know, I'm also a descendant of George Mason. He is one of our founding fathers. There's a statue of him in front of the Johnson Center at George Mason University where I used to attend, as well as under George Washington at the Capitol of the Virginia General Assembly. And I'm proud of our heritage, and I think we need to remember our history, and not just our Commonwealth, but beyond, in our whole nation. But what we see is the destruction of history over the past few years, and it's really similar to what we saw in communist China and Mao's America. And we have a resident of Loudoun County, Chief Van Fleet, who has mentioned this specifically. And I expressed her concerns that the similarities that she saw growing up in communist China to what's been happening in America in the past few years. And I would highly recommend everyone's board watch Tucker Carlson's interview with her. This was just done a few days ago. And hear her story from her mouth. I think it's very important to hear. But this quote, I know, I'm glad it was mentioned earlier, but it says, remember, the nation which forgets its defenders will be forgotten. Well, remember that there were members of the Confederacy who fought in the Mexican-American War. They fought for our nation before the Civil War. Then after the Civil War, you know, we reunited. We acknowledged, okay, we're one United States. They fought with, you know, forces in the Spanish-American War that, you know, Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders had fought in. And they were our defenders in many ways, you know, before the war and after the war. We shouldn't forget that. And there was an act of Congress saying, we're going to treat them as veterans. And of course, Woodrow Wilson dedicated the monument that Moses Ezekiel, who was a Jewish American. He was the first Jewish cadet of the Virginia Military Institute. And my significant other is Jewish. You know, her whole family is Jewish. You know, a lot of them live in Florida and other states. So I'm Christian, but you know, there's a lot of Jewish members of my family. My 3-month-old son, you know, I'd say he's part Jewish as well. And, you know, we're proud of that heritage. But it was really heartbreaking to see that, you know, we acted on the recommendation of the Renaming Commission a month after, well, basically, you know, 2 months after the deadly attacks of October 7th of Hamas, where we massacred Jewish people. It was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust in that part of the world. And we should have done something differently. And you know, I think it was really bad. I think the Biden administration should have put a stop to it, but unfortunately they did not. And it is true, it is our members of Congress, including my Congressman Bob Good, who stood up and said that we should not be taking down this monument. But I'm hoping that we have a Republican Congress, that we have President Donald Trump, who's going to undo what has been done. And let me mention this. You know, this monument was originally created, the Reconciliation Monument was created to permanently mark the union between the North and the South. And Moses Ezekiel said that it is my greatest pleasure to feel that in the declining years of my life, I have had the honor to place some of my work in my own state. He also said, I've been waiting for 40 years to have my love for the South recognized. This was a reconciliation monument, and I understand this is an advisory committee, but we got to keep in mind, you know, I know that there are talks about relocating the monument, but I think it could be put back. And I think with the new Congress, we're going to have that done. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ann McLean, and I want to thank all of you for your service to our country. There's no way we can ever thank you for all the time and the different jobs you've held in the military, protecting us and our heritage. And I'm a historian. I'm a lifelong Virginian. I'm named for an admiral who was once for a hunter on the Mississippi, and he got cited by Admiral Nimitz in World War II. My grandfather went to VMI. I have 4 brothers. This is a family outdoor museum you all are in charge of, and it is such a treasure. And this beautiful reconciliation monument, I can't do any better than what everyone else has said. But as an artist and a sculptor myself, and a sister and a mother and a daughter, the family drama that's represented by Moses Ezekiel is something every soldier goes through. To have that interruption on the domestic front, and you have to go overseas, or in the case of our terrible war between the states, it was such an uprooting. And when the children come through, I saw them today, coming to see this. They're now cheated of even seeing children that were represented around, and families and mothers and fathers. And so there was a very poignant family aspect to this monument. And I want to highlight what Philip Hamilton said about G. Van Fleet and the Cultural Revolution in China. We have a new war on our hands. And there are word bombs that are being floated through our higher education that have ideas that are destructive to the fabric of our nation. We've seen it in almost every institution. So as military people yourself, I think we need to be very attuned to the sort of napalm that certain academics or certain ideas can do that will shatter us. And to take a headstone from this Jewish artist, and by the way, there's no other artist that I know of, no other veteran in Arlington that's buried that actually was a creative artist. I think that's a very unique story to tell. But most important is the reconciliation here, that the North and South came together, that we could do that all the presidents put a wreath here, and it was honored. And I also hope that this will be put back up. Dresden was bombed in World War II. As you all know, you can go home and you can look on your YouTubes about Dresden before, and the beautiful church there over in Germany, and what happened and how we've seen it. It was devastating. I feel hopeful that with the right people and the right hearts in this room, and I know each one of you, we're among friends here. I think you care about the nation and families here. This could be put back up. And if, as Tim said earlier, there's a tomb guard here, the tomb of the unknown soldier, are we going to guard our tombs? What have we done here? We've allowed the deconstruction of a tomb on our watch because certain people have come in and said this is a good idea. We have to be wiser than that. And I just hope that you will use your great influence, your connections on the Hill. There were 44
representatives that wrote a letter that said, please don't do this, stop Congress, it's an omnibus bill, 370th item. Who can even keep track of 370 items that had one item each? When that hit, that omnibus bill, just like you said, there weren't 3 that knew what was even being passed. And that's a gross injustice to our citizens. And I was on those citizen calls, and there was one on each call. 120 people, 1 person against. 77, 1 person against. 74, 1 person against. Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
I think that was everyone.
Thank you all for your comments and your willingness to stick with us. Next item of the agenda